and instead of doing it in a half-hearted way.
नहीं वो तो खैर मेरे ख्याल से मनिंदर अग्रवाल भी बोल सकता है उसके ऊपर, क्योंकि काम तो उसका बेसिकली
No, no,
फाइबर
you see,
ऑप्टिक्स।
that is entirely different.
अच्छा,
Sir, we have
It's
started a live telecast on Facebook now.
Hello, Deepak. How are you? Good morning.
टेलीकॉम का चाहिए कोई।
Shall we
Over
wait
to
for a
Professor Kia, ma'am. हाँ जी.
couple of shall we wait for a couple of minutes?
Wait,
Yes, ma'am. You
everyone.
can wait.
Everyone. Yeah.
अनुज, अनुज,
Yes, sir. Please.
एक प्रपोजल आप तैयार कर लीजिए, जो कि कुछ फंडिंग भी हम रेज कर सकते हैं, डीएसटी चंडीगढ़ से भी कर सकते हैं और भारत सरकार से भी कर सकते हैं,
Sure, sir.
क्योंकि इस बारे में $1-2 लाख रुपए मिलना कोई मुश्किल बात नहीं है।
ठीक है सर.
To have a session
हाँ,
on Kapani and
yeah.
possibly a booklet
हाँ, बुकलेट कपानी का भी
following
और
following that.
हाँ बिल्कुल कोहली का, इन सब का जो है एक्चुअली ग्रोवर साहब आपकी इसमें काफी योगदान रह सकता है. वी कैन कम अप विद an e-book on some of these people who developed revolutionary technologies.
Yeah, point is that this would be a nice thing to do on behalf of Punjab Engineering College's centenary, because these are all technology related. And let's
Right.
own them, and let's own them on behalf of our technology institute for which we are commemorating the centenary. So we should link up with Professor Dheeraj Sanghi and have this be brought up as a part of.
If we have to work, then it has to be a joint collaboration with the PEC.
Yeah, so we should do it as this thing, because anyway PEC is hosting this wonderful series of centenary lectures. So we should just call it a part of the commemoration of celebrating the technology on behalf of Punjab, okay, and as a part of our premier technological institute, PEC. It would be nice to go at that route, and we should talk to Professor Dheeraj Sanghi tomorrow.
Yeah. So let's begin.
आगे कितने लोग हैं?
There are about 30 people now.
Yes.
And I presume more and more people will join. So a very good morning to all of you assembled here on Zoom and to the people who are on Facebook. A very good morning to you. Nice, bright, sunny morning. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy the lecture. We have today the second talk on the Nobel Prize Chemistry this year, which is a very fitting tribute to these two ladies, because it is the first time in the history of Nobel Prizes in science that two women got the Nobel Prize. And moreover, these two have been collaborators. So we have had two women speaking on the subject. The first talk, which took place last month, was by Professor Madhu Khullar of PGI. And today we are going to have the second talk by Dr. Mehak Sharma, who is an associate professor in IISER Mohali. So I now request Professor Arun Grover to give his few opening remarks. Sir Grover.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
So it's once again my privilege to welcome all of you on the occasion of our 6th session and a 7th lecture in this expository lectures on Nobel Prizes, Abel Prize, and the Turing Award. When we commenced this series, we started with the Nobel Prizes, but as we have gone along, we have decided to add the Abel Prize as well as the Turing Award 2020. So as you are all aware that the Nobel Prizes would be awarded on December 10. So by December 10, we would have completed expository talks on all the Nobel Prizes of 2020. The Turing and Abel Prizes were given in March of 2020, and before the next 2021 prizes are announced, we would have also completed the expository lectures on Abel Prize as well as the Turing Award. So the 7 lectures we have had so far, Kiaji just told us that today's is the second lecture on the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. We also had 2 lectures, 2 presentations on a Nobel Prizes in Physics last week by Professor Jassal as well as Professor Bagla from Aiza Mohali. You're all aware that when we commenced the expository lectures, it was in partnership with Aiza Mohali, and we are very happy that we have a 3rd presentation in this series on behalf of Aiza Mohali. In between, we also had a presentation on the Nobel Prize in Literature by Professor Pushpinder Syal from Punjab University. When it came to the Nobel Prize in Economics, we had a lecture, expository lectures from Professor Krishnendu Ghosh Dastidar from Jawaharlal Nehru University. So already our forum has become a multi-institutional forum, and we are doing it, as you are aware, on behalf of a well-known NGO of Northwest of India, namely Society for Promotion of Science and Technology in India, which was created in the year 2009 during the birth centenary year of Homi Bhabha. So in the true spirit of Homi Bhabha, who wanted the scientific temper and the curiosity-driven science to be done, not just in few institutions, he wanted this to happen in all universities of India. And today, we are in a position, okay, with the establishment of Aiza-like Institute, nearly 10 of them distributed all across India. And now we have IITs and NITs in sufficiently large number. We also have large number of central universities all across India. So at the moment, we have of the order of 100 institutions which have a national character and which get in the young people, the very best from India, from all parts of India, to enroll in these institutions. And the purpose of these expository lectures on Nobel Prizes, Abel Prize, and the Turing Award is to see their lectures reach all across India. Our lectures may not be reaching, I mean, they can reach everyone, but maybe they are not being listened to live at the moment by the audiences all across India. But since we are putting all these lectures on the Facebook, and we are also putting recording offline, so these lecture prima facie at one place, okay, expository lectures, all the prestigious international prizes would be available to the young students of India from the prestigious institutions as well as from the universities, colleges, and everywhere. You know, this one forum is getting created, and as the President SPC STI agreed with us that we will make it an annual event, okay, so that it is not our annual event, but is also a national annual event available to the young people all across India. And today we are aware that the students in the schools, they participate in the science Olympiad competitions, which are conducted by the Indian Association of Physics Teachers, Chemistry Teachers, Maths Teachers, the IT teachers. There are, teachers' bodies which conduct these examinations, and slowly they filter around. Then the Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education holds these camps before that, selects half a dozen students are selected to go and participate in the Olympiad competitions. And we are aware that today the in young Indian students bring back medals in almost all the fields. we haven't been lucky that Indians have won Nobel Prizes in large numbers over the last 100 years, but we have registered our presence in every field. I mean, we have had at least an Indian origin person who won the Nobel Prize in literature, Nobel Prize in medicine, Nobel Prize in chemistry. We have a Fields medalist of Indian origin. We also have an Indian who has Professor Vardhan who won the Abel Prize. We also had
Lalit.
an Indian who won the Turing Award, namely Professor Raj Reddy, and Professor Dheeraj Sanghi was kind enough to arrange the first PEC centenary lectures by Professor Raj Reddy at one of our forums. So Peace Prize also have been won by two Indians. So Indians have registered presence in prestigious prizes in all fields so far. We want these numbers to rise, and one of the objectives of disseminating the information on sciences, popularization on sciences, make the civic society aware of so much of a talent that we have on behalf of India. So this is the purpose of these lectures, and I'm very happy that we have come up to today, and we should complete this series, and we'll do it year after year. And let me just conclude by saying that just 2 days ago, the Infosys Science Foundation announced the winners for the Infosys Science Prize 2020. So Infosys Science Prize 2020 were awarded in the 6 fields. 3 of these prizes have gone to scientists based in India, or it's not only scientists, but it's scientists, social scientists, humanities, academics based. 3 of them are academics based in India. One, Professor Prachi Deshpande from Calcutta, Arindam Ghosh from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and Shankar Narayan from CCMB, Hyderabad, and 3 more persons selected are from Hari Balakrishnan from MIT. Then we have Saurav Chatterjee from Stanford, and we also have Raj Chetty in Economic Sciences from the Harvard University. So I have already started to contact these people, and we propose to invite them to give expository lectures before the next year's Infosys prizes would get announced. So this series of things, with the help and support of all of us who are present today on the Zoom platform, hopefully these things will continue. More institutions within the Chandigarh region as well as from outside Chandigarh region will come on this platform and keep this thing running year after year. So with this, I conclude and invite Dr. Mehak, Professor Mehak Sharma from IISER to make a presentation. But before that, somebody will formally introduce our speaker for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Grover. Now I request Ms. Rajni Bhalla, who is also the Joint Secretary of SPSTI, to introduce today's speaker. Rajni.
Good morning, everyone. I am privileged to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Mehak Sharma, Associate Professor and Wellcome Trust DBT Senior Fellow, Department of Biological Sciences, IISER Mohali, for her online awareness lecture on Nobel Prize in Chemistry 2020, jointly conducted by the Society for Promotion of Science and Technology in India, SPSTI, and the Chandigarh chapter of NASI, which is also supported by Department of Science and Technology, Chandigarh Administration. Dr. Mehak Sharma got her PhD training under the mentorship of Dr. Steve Kaplan and Neva Neslavsky at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, Omaha, USA, where she worked on cellular transport pathways. She then did her postdoctoral fellowship with Dr. Michael Brenner at Brigham and Women's Hospital, Harvard Medical School, Boston, USA, studying protein transport in immune cells in 2011 Mehak moved back to India to set up her independent laboratory at IISER Mohali. There she is currently working as an associate professor and Wellcome Trust DBT India Alliance Senior Fellow in the Department of Biological Sciences. Her research interests are focused on studying the mechanism regulating membrane transport towards lysosomes and how bacterial pathogens exploit these pathways for their growth and survival. There is long list of nominations, honors, and awards bestowed upon Dr. Mehak, including National Academy of Sciences India Young Scientist Platinum Jubilee Award, Indian National Science Academy Medal for Young Scientists, co-recipient of IISER Mohali Best Teacher Award. Dr. Mehak Sharma has also been awarded Science and Engineering Research Board Women Excellence Award in 2017, which is a one-time award given to women scientists below 40 years of age and who have received recognition from any one or more of the national level agencies. Her research and writings have been placed and covered in various reputed science online news media. We are eager to listen to you, Dr. Mehak Sharma, and I request now Dr. Kya Dharamveer to kindly take over. Thank you.
So should I share my screen now?
Yes, please.
Please let me know if you can see this.
Yes, we can see.
Yes, yes, very clear.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Rajni, and thank you, Professor Dharamveer and Professor Grover for this amazing opportunity to discuss about the chemistry prize today. And as Professor Dharamveer was saying, that the prize has gone to two women scientists, Jennifer Doudna at University of California, Berkeley, and Emmanuel Charpentier, who's now at Max Planck Unit Science for Pathogens. And they have got the prize, as we all know by now, for the development of a method for genome editing. And as Professor Dharamveer was saying that, this is also the first time that two women scientists have won the Nobel Prize. It's an all-women team. So I hope that this serves as a glowing reminder to all the girls and to all the, researchers out there to keep pursuing science and to have a career in science. This method for genome editing is, known as CRISPR-Cas9 system, but in short, it's called as a CRISPR genome editing system. And this is beautifully illustrated here in this slide. What you are seeing are these, different models written in the shape of these alphabets. And there is a significance to the way that it is written here in this way, because in each of these, we have been able to, when I say we, I mean the global scientific community has been able to demonstrate this method of editing the genomes. So a honeybee genome has been edited using this technique. This is a protein molecule. Pig, as we can see, we have now CRISPR edited pigs, which are, where serving as models for organ transplant, crops, such as shown here, tomato shown here. And please figure out what is a woolly mammoth written in the shape of P doing here. So I, just out of curiosity, type on Google woolly mammoth and CRISPR and see what comes up. So, and also as it says that this technique, first shown by Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier to be a programmable system for editing the genome of any living cell, has actually revolutionized life sciences, medical sciences since its discovery. And that is why, it's written here, CRISPR everywhere, because in the past decade or so, this technique has been shown to kind of bring about a revolution, as you will see in my subsequent slides. So what I want to do in this talk is that before I delve deeper into what exactly is this method for which the prize has been awarded, I want to go back to the basics, to Bio 101, and tell you that what does the word gene, genome mean? And what does this concept of gene editing means? Why is it important? And then I want to briefly discuss with you the discovery of this process. Where does it happen naturally before we actually come to this method that was developed by Doudna and Charpentier. So going back to the basics, I thought that it is much easier to understand a concept if you can imagine it, if you can physically place it, as you can physically see the objects around you. So let's imagine that what is DNA in its physical form. Genomic material or DNA is the molecule that is transferred from parents to the children. Okay, so this is what I would say that could be a good definition for what DNA is. It's the molecule that is being transmitted from one generation to another. And in our species, we know that each parent will contribute to 23 molecules of DNA to their child, resulting in a total of 46 molecules of DNA, which would be present in one cell of the human embryo at the time of its birth. And this 46 molecules of DNA contains all the information, and if present in the right environment, can result in development of the human embryo to its adult stage. And this is the reason that the fact that you share your parents' DNA is the reason that you look like them. So we can see that the children look like the parent, as you can see in this slide. And this also tells you that DNA is actually regulating the characteristics of the individual. Whatever external appearance that you are seeing is being determined by DNA. When we say that that certain features run in the families, like blue eyes or brown hair, so on and so forth, what is actually determining this feature is the DNA which is present in the individual and which that individual shares with their parents. So then, to understand it in more depth, let us ask two questions. At the level of cells, okay, so we are now at the cellular level in the individual cells of our body. Let's ask two simple questions. Where is DNA located? And the next question, which is more profound, what is the function of this molecule in our cells? Now, if you gently scrape out some cells from your cheek area, and you have the ability to see it through a microscope, or maybe more handy versions of microscopes, which are called as foldscopes. If you will look at these cells, within each cell that you will look at, you will find a structure which is called as nucleus. Okay? And it is in the nucleus that your genomic material or genome of the cell is residing. Probably many people in my audience today have seen this form of DNA, which is a very packaged form, which we can call as a chromosome. Okay. If you unravel this chromosome, if the way that it is shown in this slide, if you just kind of pull it apart, remove all the, strip it off to its bare minimum and go to the resolution where you can now see this molecule in its most unraveled form, this is what you would see. You would see it in the form of a double helix, also the most famous structure in biology. We can imagine this to be like a helical, staircase, kind of just spiraling upwards. The railings of the staircase are the two strands of DNA, and each of the steps of this molecule are made up of four different kinds of let's call them four different kinds of bases. Okay, so the steps here that you can see are 4 bases which famously go by their first, the first alphabet. A is for adenine, G is for thymine, G is for guanine, and C is for cytosine. So the bases which are present on one strand form a link with the base which is present on the other strand. And each of these base pair links are what is forming the steps. And the way that these bases occur in this DNA molecule is also known as the sequence of a particular DNA molecule. Now the bases don't link with each other randomly. The way their shapes are, they can only form a specific link. And this link, we know it now for many decades that the base A, adenine, links with thymine as shown here, and the base C, cytosine, links with guanine. So let us revise what we just learned, that DNA is present in the nucleus of our cells. There are some exceptions like red blood cells which do not contain a nucleus and do not contain DNA, but in general this is true. This is also true for almost every living organism on earth, that the DNA is present in the cells. Sometimes the nucleus might be missing because it's a bacterial cell. The DNA in all living organisms consists of 4 bases, A, T, G, and C. And there is a base pairing rule that A always pairs with T and G always pairs with C. Many of these points that I've said here, they are universal. They are true for almost all living organisms on earth. Because of this base pairing rule that A pairs with T and G pairs with C, it gives a special property to DNA. And we go now to the second question that I had asked, that what is the function of DNA? So DNA can make a copy of itself. If you have one strand of DNA with a certain sequence, it can make a new copy of itself because of the fact that the sequence of one strand can determine the sequence of what we call scientifically as a complementary strand. So immediately we can see that the base pairing rule here is dictating the formation of the new strand of DNA. So that is one property of DNA, that it can self-replicate. It can make a copy of itself. The other important, very important role of DNA is that it can serve as a template to make a molecule in our cell, which is very similar to DNA, but with few differences. And let's call this molecule as an RNA. So the way DNA can make a copy of itself, it can also dictate the synthesis of a molecule in our cells, which is called as RNA. And this intermediate molecule serves as a template for synthesis of proteins. Okay, so in short, what is the function of DNA in our cells? We can say that the function of DNA in our cells is that it acts as a template for making proteins. And again, this process, that DNA dictates the formation of RNA, and RNA then serves as a template for formation of protein, is also a universal process that happens in all living organisms. And this is why it is termed as the central dogma. A technical term here which will become important and is important to know, that not all DNA sequence will code for a protein, will act as a template for protein. The particular sequence of DNA or piece of DNA that codes, that acts as a template for proteins, is therefore called as a gene. So this was also seen in my previous slide, where they were indicating in this schematic that this segment of DNA is acting as a template for making protein, for making the RNA which will make the protein, and therefore we can call this segment as a gene. Now, why is this function of DNA important, that it can act as a template for making proteins? Why is it such a profound function of this molecule? The simple answer to this is that proteins do all the work in our cells. All chemical reactions, with few exceptions maybe, anything that you are doing which can be called as a living process of the living being, is being regulated, is being executed by the proteins. So we can call proteins as the workhorses of the cell. We can term them as, simple small molecular machines which are doing all the work that a living being does. So I'm speaking to you is the action of proteins. You are listening to me, it's because the proteins, let's say in your cells and your neurons, are regulating this process, and you are able to hear my voice and you are able to interpret what I'm saying. So it's a very, very important function that DNA acts as a template to make proteins, because proteins are regulating all the processes that are happening at the level of the cell and at the level of the organism. So if we just follow this logical flow of sequence, then we can also agree with the statement that if we want to change a protein, then you have to change the sequence of DNA, which is responsible for making that protein. So you have to change the sequence of that gene, which is making that protein. And this process of changing the DNA, let's now give it a term called as gene editing. Okay. So now you may pose a question to me that, why would we want to change the sequence of a protein? In what scenarios would this be needed? So to justify that, I'm giving you an example with the help of a disease. Maybe some of you have heard of it. This is called as sickle cell anemia, a disease, which is a disorder of the blood, of the molecule present in our blood called as hemoglobin. And, every year, almost 200,000 children are inflicted with this disease. Specifically, this disease happens in Africa. And now we also know that this disease is widespread in a certain part of central India. So what happens in sickle cell anemia is that while in a normal person, the red blood cells of your, which are present in your blood look like this, more like a spherical shape. The red blood cells in a patient of sickle cell anemia actually appear, in the shape of this C, which also looks like a sickle with which, let's say we cut grass, and that is the origin of the name. So under certain circumstances, the red blood cells in these patients may start looking like this. And what happens in these patients is that this particular form of the red blood cell is unable to carry oxygen properly, and also is unable to exit, to properly mature. And so these people are deficient in the red blood cells and therefore called as anemic. The patients, they suffer from recurrent painful episodes. They can suffer from pneumonia as well as kidney failure. So this is a pretty debilitating disorder that happens in a certain frequency in large number of individuals. So going back to my slide before that, why am I telling you about this disease? The reason is that all this profound changes that you are seeing in the shape of the red blood cell happens because of a single change in the sequence of DNA, which is coding for the protein hemoglobin. Okay, so as we know, hemoglobin is a protein which is present in the red blood cells. It binds to iron and it is the carrier of oxygen in these cells. In the normal form, in normal individuals, at a certain position in the DNA of hemoglobin gene, there is the A base present. Okay. You may think that a profound change like sickle cell would, there would be multiple, it would be a profound event which is causing that change. No, that's not correct. What we actually have figured out through sequencing the genome of these sickle cell anemia patients is that there is a single base pair change that is responsible for many cases of the sickle cell anemia, where this A is now mutated into a T base. And going by the analogy that I showed you in my first slide, that DNA acts as a template for RNA. So if the DNA is changed, the RNA shows a change. And when the RNA is changed, instead of forming a normal protein, which has a normal amino acid in this place, now what you get is a mutant protein with a different amino acid present at the same place. And this mutant protein is unable to bind to oxygen readily, and its structure is also distorted, causing the distortion in the shape of the cell which is carrying this protein. So now, probably you have already guessed, the question that I posed, that under what conditions would we want to change a protein. Sickle cell anemia, gives a great justification for such a case, that you would want to change this one particular base and revert it back to the A base, so that instead of getting a mutant protein, now you can get a normal protein. So how to cure genetic disorders like sickle cell anemia? We can imagine a hypothetical scenario, which I've listed in my next slide, that what if we know that this is the base, this is the sequence which is giving us trouble, okay, which is the bad or the incorrect base present in the gene of hemoglobin. What if we had the ability to basically snip out, kind of cut one strand of DNA with, let us say, a scissor-like agent or an enzyme, cut the other strand and remove this base and insert the right base, which was, adenine A in its place, so that you can get the correct hemoglobin placed in these cells. And you can do such an experiment, let us say, in the stem cell of the blood, so that this change is now incorporated in all the cells which are being made by this stem cell. Okay. But now, as we can see that there is a problem, we have the disease, we know what is wrong with this disease. What we need is an agent, a magical scissor, which can basically cut the DNA at a very specific location. Okay. The question then becomes that where to find this molecular scissor, which is, in reality should be a protein or an enzyme that can cut both strands of DNA at a very specific location, and then the correct base or correct sequence can be inserted in the place of the incorrect sequence. You may think that, now I will utter a statement like this, that, and then the scientists discovered the simplest and the most efficient and the most accurate molecular scissor, which is the CRISPR-Cas gene editing system. Okay. I would be uttering this statement if I was narrating to you a fairy tale or a fictional tale. In reality, it does not happen like this. Okay. In reality, the path of discovery is more often than not, unpredictable. Okay. So in my next few slides, I want to talk to you a little bit about this path of discovery. How was this CRISPR-Cas gene editing system discovered? And as you will see that, this discovery, was by the initial scientists were not looking for this molecular scissor. They were just asking questions that fascinated them. So as shown beautifully in this cartoon, that, let's imagine this to be a scientist or a curious person who's, just doing something out of, just out of sheer curiosity. I was just rubbing sticks together for fun. And out of that curiosity, out of making those very significant and robust observations, but driven by curiosity, maybe you will end up discovering fire. Okay, and this is what has happened with the CRISPR-Cas gene editing system. So in the next few slides, I want to narrate to you a little bit about the beginning of this, the discovery of the CRISPR-Cas system. And as Isaac Newton had said, that truth is to be found in the simplicity of the things. Actually, the story of CRISPR discovery begins with the simplest of the living forms. And the simplest of this living form is the bacteria and the viruses that infect this bacteria. So let me take you to the beginning of, how this gene editing system was uncovered. And I want to introduce to you the scientist, Francois Moika, who was working at the time, and this was, late 90s, early 2000. He was working at the time in University of Alicante in Spain, which is located in this beautiful, coastal town, Santa Pola, which has these salt marshes, and, it's a favorite spot for vacationers, for flamingos, and for people who are interested in commercialing, salt. So Moika is a scientist who we can call as a computational biologist. So he would make his observations on a computer with the help of a computer. He would see his observations and he would make hypotheses, and then he would try to find the answers to his question with the help of computer. And what Moika was interested in was the DNA sequences in bacteria. So in one such, in one such observational period, this is what Moika noticed, that in the sequence of certain DNA, which he obtained locally from the salt marshes of this town. So this was a salt tolerant bacteria. He noticed that a part of the sequence of DNA contained this repeats. So as you can see, the sequence which is highlighted in the box here is repeating number of times. Okay, I'm pointing my mouse cursor to the number of times the same sequence is occurring in the genome of this salt tolerant bacteria. And this caught his attention. This thing caught his attention. There was also another feature of the sequence. This particular sequence was intervened. It was not occurring one after the other. There was always a spacer element, a certain sequence which was not similar to this was occurring in between. And the length, let's say, of this particular DNA sequence was 32 base pairs. So there are 32 bases listed here. And after these 32 bases, again, this repeat sequence was occurring. Okay. So this is the observation that Moika noted, that a repeat sequence, an unusual repeat sequence is occurring in the genome of this salt tolerant bacteria, which he later on also found occurs in common bacteria which is present, let's say, in our intestines, which is called as Escherichia coli. So this sequence was present in number of bacteria, and every time the sequence would repeat itself after a certain spacer sequence. So there was an intervening sequence in between. Okay, and the sequence of the spacer was different each time. So this kind of motif that Moika saw, and also his colleagues, he gave this as a term. He gave this as the acronym CRISPR, which stands for clustered, because this was all, this entire thing was present in a short region of the bacterial genome, okay, which can probably be less than, 10,000 bases long. This was all occurring in a clustered way, very, hobbled together to each other. It had a regular nature, okay, so the sequence was occurring. It had a very predictable, regular nature. Number of repeats were occurring, and it was interspaced. Every time the repeat was there, there was a spacer in between. So interspaced. The sequence itself was short. So we have CRIS. He also noted that the repeat sequence actually had what we call as a palindromic characteristic. Now in the English language, palindrome word means something which reads the same when you're reading it from the front as well as from the back. An example of the palindrome is, let us say this phrase, never odd or even. If you read it in this direction, or if you read it in this direction, you will find that it reads the same. There are other examples of palindromes, madam, Malayalam, never, so on and so forth. I think not never, level, yeah. In the language of DNA, palindrome means a sequence of DNA, again, that could be read the same way forward and backward. So there is a certain way of reading a DNA sequence. It's called as a 5' to 3' direction. And if you read the sequence, it would be same in both, both sequences would be same in if read from 5' to 3' direction. the nature of a palindromic sequence is that it would form a hairpin loop. And I'll show you an example of that in my next slide. And the last word comes from the word repeat because the sequence was repetitive in nature. And so Moika and one of his colleagues gave the name CRISPR for this particular unusual sequence in the genome of the bacteria. Now, for a long time, this bothered Moika. Okay, he just wanted to know that why is this sequence present in bacterial genome? What is its function? And he kept on looking at the repeated, the sequence which is repeating. But then probably, I'm just imagining that probably he got frustrated and now he switched his attention to the spacer sequence. He removed his attention from the repeated sequence and he now put his attention to the sequence which was occurring in the intervening region, which is the spacer sequence. So Moika painstakingly, he took each spacer DNA and he checked in its computer in the databases to identify that which other organism contains a sequence which is similar to the spacer sequence present in the bacteria. And this is where I would call that Moika hit his eureka moment. Okay. In one of his searches, he actually found out the organism which contains a sequence very similar to this spacer intervening sequence present in bacteria. And the organism that appeared on his computer screen was a virus called as bacteriophage. Okay. These are viruses that actually infect bacteria and they replicate inside the bacterial cell. So this bacteriophage actually has a very dramatic appearance, as you can see in this slide. And what this virus does is it injects its DNA into the bacterial cell. And again, DNA has all the information to make a new virus. So injecting the virus DNA into the bacterial cell would then help, with the help of the bacterial host machinery, this virus can make more copies of itself. There were other observations then noted after this discovery of Moika that the bacteria that contain the CRISPR spacers, the bacteria that are harboring this spacer sequence in their genome, are actually resistant to infection by the bacteriophages. So now putting 2 and 2 together, that if the bacteria contains the spacer in its genome, then it is resistant to the virus if it infects this bacteria. Moika and several other colleagues at the time, they developed a hypothesis that probably this CRISPR system is like an immune system of the bacteria against the viruses that infect these bacteria. Okay, because this observation was noted that bacteria that contain these spacers are resistant to infection by the bacteriophages. Now, some part of this work, of this hypothesis, was actually developed by a scientist called as Philip Horowitz, who was working in a company which makes yogurt and cheeses. And why would such a company be interested in this? Because, well, these products that we regularly consume are actually made by bacteria. And it is a big problem for a company which makes, products like yogurt and cheese if their bacteria undergoes a phage attack. So they were quite interested in developing the resistant varieties of bacteria that can respond to the attack by phages. And hence they were interested in the CRISPR system. Okay. So let's see this schematically. What I've told you till now, what Moika and Philip Horowitz and their colleagues had uncovered was that when a bacteriophage infects the bacteria, it stores a memory of its DNA, of the viral DNA in its genome in the form of spacer. Now, these scientists also observed that next to the spacer, there are a set of genes which are lying very, very close to the spacer CRISPR locus. And these genes came to be known as the CRISPR associated genes or the Cas genes. Okay. So now let's look at this particular system in more depth. You have two components that I've told you till now, the CRISPR associated genes and the spacer DNA. Through research that went on onto this CRISPR-Cas system, it was uncovered that one of the genes which is present on this CRISPR associated gene locus actually is an enzyme, And this enzyme has an activity that it can cut DNA. Okay. So one of the genes in this Cas locus, okay, one of the genes in the Cas locus was coding for an enzyme which had the activity to cut DNA. So now we can imagine this to be as the molecular scissor. And we know that the DNA codes for RNA. So this spacer DNA was actually forming an RNA in the bacterial cell, which then came to be known as the CRISPR RNA. And this is that palindromic sequence, okay, the hairpin structure. And this, the region which is highlighted in a different color, in the orange color, is the sequence which is similar to the viral DNA. Okay, so this is your spacer RNA, which is very, very similar to the sequence present in the viral DNA. Here I also want to introduce to you a third component of the CRISPR-Cas system that was discovered by one of the laureates, Emmanuelle Charpentier, who was an expert in the bacterial physiology and bacterial antibiotic resistance. She actually discovered that there is another RNA that is present in these bacteria, which we can call as a trans-activating RNA or tracker RNA. She found abundant amounts of this RNA in the bacterial cell, but its role was not understood. She kind of suspected that, you know, the tracer RNA would be involved in the CRISPR-Cas system, but it was not exactly clear that how does all of this come together. So there were some, you know, important questions at this point. This all appears to be different components, but how do they come together so that bacteria can defend itself against the virus was not clear. And let me put this as a question. How was the DNA of the virus recognized and how was it cut was not clear. Was there a role of this molecular scissor called as Cas9? And was both of those RNA, the CRISPR RNA, which contains that spacer sequence, and the tracer RNA, which was discovered by one of our laureates, were both of them required for this process of cutting the phage DNA and inactivating it? Okay, so it remained as a hypothesis until a fortuitous accident when in one of the conferences, Emmanuelle Charpentier, who was already working on this problem, met Jennifer Doudna, who had just heard about it. And Doudna was an fine biochemist, someone who used the tools of structural biology to study RNA molecules. And their fortuitous meeting led to a collaboration. And then these two scientists devised a strategy to answer a question. And what was their strategy? We can call this strategy in scientific terms as a reconstitution. In simple terms, what these two scientists set out to do was they wanted to isolate this entire system from the complex environment of the cell. So take out individual components of this, the CRISPR loci, the RNA, the enzyme, take them in their purified form in a test tube and try to see if in a test tube, in an environment which is free from the complex environment of the cell, can you now see that assembling the molecular scissor with the RNA and with the target DNA, would you see the reaction of cutting of DNA or not? And this strategy in scientific terms we can call as a reconstitution system. Okay, and this is what they set out to do. It was a challenging strategy. They did not know the outcome and they expected that this strategy would fail. But in any case, they tried it out, and thankfully so. So this was the first, the reaction that they set up, the first test tube reaction, and they did not had a clue what to do. So they basically took the enzyme. They knew that the enzyme was needed because it is the protein only which will cut the DNA. They took the spacer or the CRISPR RNA, which has some homology with the target DNA. This is shown in green in the same color. And obviously they took the DNA, which they wanted to see if this complex can cut it. So the target DNA. And their first experiment, as always it happens in science, it failed. They did not see any cut in the target DNA. Now, Charpentier, from her experience, knew that the tracer RNA has something to do with this whole process. Maybe it is required for activating this complex. So now in the second reaction that they set up, they actually included the tracer RNA in this mix. So now this particular test tube contains the enzyme, the molecular scissor. It contains the CRISPR RNA, which has the spacer sequence, contains the target DNA. All of this was also present in their first reaction. And now in addition, they added the tracer RNA. And voila, this time they found that their target DNA was cut at a predictable location, which they could predict by homology between this sequence and this sequence. So they indeed found that the target DNA was cut. And this was the first demonstration of the fact that CRISPR-Cas9 is a system which can make double-stranded cuts in a target DNA, and homology between the CRISPR RNA and target DNA is needed to make that cut. And based on this reaction, Doudna and Charpentier proposed a model in which these three components, Cas9, CRISPR RNA, and tracer RNA, come together. They form a complex on the genomic DNA, let us say, of the virus. So this complex, it keeps on scanning for the DNA for regions of similarity. So this is the scanning stage. As soon as it hits a region of similarity, so now we can see the base pairing has happened between this sequence and this sequence. And this is when the enzyme activity of your Cas protein becomes active. The DNA opens up and you have the enzymatic activity cutting the two strands of DNA at a very, very precise and specific location. And so they proposed that this is how the bacteria must be inactivating the DNA of the virus which is attacking it, because it can cut the viral DNA into two. And a viral DNA, when it is cut, it can no longer form the new viral copies in the bacteria, and this bacteria is now resistant to the viruses. Okay. So Doudna and Charpentier, they had the vision and the brilliance to see that what they have uncovered is a very simple, accurate gene editing system, which probably can be programmed to cut any particular DNA molecule of choice. But they wanted to simplify this simple system further. Okay. And so from now on, what I want to tell you is the work for which they have got the prize. Okay. So they did the key experiment. The first brilliant thing that they did was they simplified the system further. They asked a question that since it's a 3-component system, you also need 2 different RNA molecules for this system to work in its natural environment, the CRISPR RNA and the tracer RNA. But they already saw that you can actually make it into a single RNA molecule. Okay. So that is what they set out to make. They designed a simple single RNA molecule, which we can now call as a guide RNA, and replace the 2 RNA with this. And now they did the same reaction. So they wanted to know if the 2 RNA activities can be combined into a single molecule. They trimmed out the region which was not needed so as to make a very short guide RNA, because shorter molecules are easier to synthesize. And then they set up the same reaction that they did before. And obviously the idea was that if you can do this, then you can potentially rewrite the DNA sequence and genome of a particular organism. So let us now look at the makeup of their experiment. And this is how actually generally we also perform, experiments. When we set out to do an experiment, we always have a negative control, which we know that it will not work. We always have a positive control, which we know will always work. And we then have an experiment which we want to test. Okay. So as you can see that in the negative control, Charpentier and Doudna set up, and their colleagues set up this reaction without any RNA. So they knew that this should not have any cut in the target DNA because there is no RNA present. The positive control was the second reaction that they did. That is the reaction that occurs in bacterial cells where they have the two RNA, CRISPR RNA and the tracer RNA. And obviously here they expect that the target DNA would be cut. And now the thing that they did, which was combining these two RNA and then removing the unnecessary regions to form a short single guide RNA to replace these two RNA molecules, okay? And this was the test reaction. They wanted to know that whether you can make the natural system better and easier, make it programmable, and would you now see that you have a simpler gene editing system in your hand. So in my next slide, I want to show you the actual image of the experiment that they did. It might be a little complicated. I'll try to explain this. Okay, so what you are seeing here is image of the experiment. This band here indicates DNA. These are, bands of a DNA, different sizes of DNA molecules. So we can estimate the size of this particular DNA molecule, and it is written here on the corner. So this DNA molecule, which was in their first reaction, is a negative control. It did not got cut. It was as its full size of 2640 bases. Okay. The reaction number 2, which they knew will work, and this is the positive control. This is the reaction that happens in the bacterial cell. You saw that the DNA was cut. So if the DNA is cut, it will appear to be smaller and it will run below this larger DNA. And indeed, we can see that this DNA was cut into two pieces, piece number 1 of 1880 bases and piece number 2, which is of the 800 bases. Combining these two, you will get the full size of the DNA molecule. And now let me show you what was the result of the experiment number 3, which they did and which actually surprisingly worked in the first go. Okay. The experiment 3, the third reaction where they had programmed the two RNA molecule into a single molecule, worked as efficiently as the one which happens in the bacterial cell. And here they could see beautifully that with the same efficiency, the gene editing Cas9 system worked, and they could see the cleavage or the cutting of the target DNA into these two pieces. And this system they had programmed, they can design it further, and that's what they did. So the final experiment that Doudna and Charpentier's labs did was they actually now took a DNA which has never been seen by bacteria. It's not of viral origin. They took a DNA of a green fluorescent protein sequence, gene sequence from jellyfish. So this is a, let's say, a completely artificial system here because the bacteria would never see this DNA in its natural environment. And they designed 3 different locations of the guide RNA, which are shown here in this schematic. They predicted that if they now add the enzyme to this reaction, then you would see cut here, here, or here. And this is exactly what they got. They found that this CRISPR-Cas9 system or their guide RNA Cas9 system actually cuts at a very predictable location, and you can program this particular thing to cut any DNA sequence. What happens after the cut? Our cells recognize that, if a DNA is cut, they try to repair that DNA. So what we can do, let us say if we were imagining this to be the gene of sickle cell anemia, we can provide the correct base in the form of a donor DNA. And this, through the help of cellular machinery, it will be incorporated into the site where the DNA is cut. So the challenging part of gene editing is to cut the DNA at a very, very precise location and not cut it at other locations. And then the repair part, which happens with less efficiency, but it happens naturally in our cells, you can provide a donor DNA so that this repair can be fixed. And in this way, you can actually remove the incorrect base as we can imagine that we can now do for sickle cell anemia gene, and you can replace it with the correct donor DNA containing the correct base. Okay. So this discovery, this whole thing was reported by the groups of Doudna and Charpentier in 2012 in a science paper. And shortly after that, it was shown that this simple 2-component system, the single guide RNA with the enzyme, can actually be put in any living cell and it would edit the target DNA. And again, the groups of Charpentier and Doudna, along with a group in Lithuania University of Virginis Sickness, who actually, almost at the same time reported the exact same thing that was uncovered by Doudna and Charpentier. And the group of Feng Zhang at Broad Institute showed that this 2-component simple system can be programmed to work in any living cell, and you can actually cut the DNA at the site of your choice. Okay. And within a year or so, the CRISPR-Cas9 system, kind of became the go-to approach to edit the genome, to knock out the gene of your interest and to study its function. I remember that in my lab, we got the CRISPR-Cas9 system to work in 2015, 3 years after its discovery. This is tremendous pace. And I don't think that we are very technologically, advanced in my lab, and even we could get it to work because it is so simple and so accurate, and it worked beautifully. So I'll end my, almost end my lecture here, and the rest, as they say, is history. You can type on internet CRISPR-Cas9 and you will see the plethora of things, the remarkable things that the scientists have been able to achieve with this simple programmable gene editing tool. So in less than a decade after its discovery, as I said, 2012, this was published. Researchers have used this simple gene editing system to develop genome edited crops, genome edited insects, genetic models of human diseases for which we did not had a model before, like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or muscular dystrophy, test out experimental human therapies and clinical trials. This is a big deal. Less than a decade after the discovery of this, we already have clinical trials to test the use of this technique in sickle cell anemia, in hereditary blindness, as well as in more common disease like cancer. And obviously, the 3 founders, Jennifer Charpentier, as well as Feng Zhang, who showed it in the eukaryotic cell, have set up their companies. There are many, probably more than 100 companies which are based on this technology, and it's aiming to be a $1 billion industry. And all of this is, very glowy and, a fantastic demonstration of human ingenuity. But it also raises a concern that because it is such a simple system, that it can be done by, probably by naive, by amateurs. So there is also a big concern that what would be the limit of this gene editing system? And Jennifer Doudna was actually one of the first people to raise this concern and to have these international summits, international meetings on this, gene editing in human embryos. Should this be done? Should this not be done? The scientific community at large feels that we cannot yet advance to editing of human embryos. That would not be ethically correct. And even with that concern, actually 2 years ago, a scientist based in China has already edited the genome of 2 human embryos, and they went on to have live births. So we have actually 2 twin girls in the world today whose genome has been edited by CRISPR, and this is something that was, ethically grossly wrong, but this has been done. And one of the reasons for that is that this technique works beautifully. It is a very simple programmable gene editing system. So as they say that with great power comes great responsibility, and to responsibly use CRISPR is a challenge that the scientific community is facing. So I'll end my talk here. Sorry for this, this was slightly more elaborate and longer than I expected. But, I want to end it on the note that, this is a remarkable breakthrough. This is a revolutionary technique, but let's not forget the origin of this technique. Okay. As one of the scientists, Eric Lander, had beautifully put in his article, that the most important lesson of CRISPR is that these, remarkable, revolutionary medical breakthroughs, they often emerge from completely unpredictable origins. If we go back to the beginning, we think about Moika, we think about Philip Horowitz. The early heroes of CRISPR were not on a quest to edit the human genome, or they didn't, even wanted to try out to study any human disease. They were not doing what we call as a relevant science. Their motivations were a mix of personal curiosity. For instance, for Moika, it was, what are these repeats doing in these salt tolerant microbes that I see in my, in the beaches that I visit? That was his, that was the question that was bothering him, a mix of personal curiosity, and probably for scientists like Philip Horowitz, how to improve bacteria for, producing yogurts and so. So these were the small questions that were bothering these scientists, which led to discovery of this, CRISPR-Cas9 system, and then the ingenuity and brilliance of our Nobel laureates, Doudna and Charpentier, who could see that this is a very simple system that they've uncovered, and that it can be programmed to cut the DNA of any living organism, and is probably very efficient and accurate. Yeah. So I'll end my lecture now, and I'll take up any questions from the audience. Thank you very much for your patience. I think the talk was slightly longer than expected. And I'll just, let me just put this here. This is for the students. For anybody who's curious out there, these are 2 links that you can check out. I think it would help you to learn biology in a much more fascinating way and away from the traditional textbook teaching. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll take up any questions.
Brilliant,
Thank you.
Very good. Excellent.
brilliant talk.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mehak. So many things have become clear today. And I would now request Professor Dua to make some remarks. Professor Dua?
Can you hear me? Good afternoon.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. No remarks after such a wonderful and synthetic approach lecture. She has just started from scratch to explain everything in such a big detail. She says at the end that the motivation has been to use the simple things. In fact, the history of the motivation is 355 years old, when, in 1665, the cell was seen by Robert Hooke and reported in a book called Micrography. That was a dead cork cell. Afterwards, another 11 years, and Leeuwenhoek, another Dutch microscopist, saw living cells, happened to see the first living cells from his dental crevices. He was so particular about the dental hygiene that he immediately sent it to UK, telling the scientists there, how can I have some sort of infection in my dental cavities? And they reported that this is very common in all the dental cavities. Things went on, and in 1833, this approach led to the discovery of a central nucleus in 1833 by Robert Brown, followed by so many other things. For 140 years, there was no, sort of a motivation to study more about the unit of life. I remember the physicist who got the Nobel Prize, Schrödinger, in 1944, wrote a wonderful book, which I happened to read many times, What is Life? And he said that life can revolve around 4 or 5 things. First is that the cell is the atom of life. Then this is not a structural unit, but this is a functional unit. This functional unit works with the help of so many polymers which are based on carbon, and that carbon is a polymer consisting of what Dr. Mehak said in the form of single dimensional carbon genome, what is called as ATGC. Afterwards, they said that diversity is like a tree of life, and this can happen only when the diversity can come with the help of another carbon skeleton, which is a three-dimensional structure, which we call it as proteins. You won't imagine, some of the audience coming from physics and other places, that in the last 19 years, this is 20th going, 68 Nobel laureates, Nobel Prizes have gone to molecular biology, whether coming from chemistry, like the one like Krebs, Hans Krebs, physicist like Schrödinger,
Chemistry.
and all those people. And Madam also says that chemistry prize should be known as chemistry biology. But these prizes have been very quick. You see, in 1896, Rontgen discovered X-ray, and 1901, the first Nobel Prize in physics goes to Rontgen. Similarly, Watson and Crick, they discovered the double helix in 1953 and get the Nobel Prize in 1962.
Yeah.
Of course, with the other two people who were there, they were working in Cambridge and they were working in Oxford. So what I mean to say that molecular biology gives a very quick result. In the similar fashion, these two scientists published their paper in 2012, and in 2020, they get the Nobel. This is all about the curiosity to find what is the question, what is the life. And fortunately, I have seen in briefing up that they all acknowledge the contribution of great scientists who have changed, who have shifted the physicist or naturalist from God to science. From God to science. And the front leader in this was Charles Darwin, who, used to, his all words are imprinted in all these Nobel laureates book, even the present Nobel laureate, this lady from France, she used to say that I remember the words of Charles Darwin at many, many places and quote it at many places. That's saying. And that is why these two ladies are called as the Thelma and Lotus of the words of science. These are the two ladies actors who aimed at very high things, but could discover it in 2 or 3 years. So gene editing, of course, Dr. Beck also said at the end that this is a very subtle question. He, the Chinese, he, used this technology to produce two children, Lulu and Nana. Lulu and Nana.
Yeah.
And he claimed that these two children are resistant to AIDS virus. Now they are living, still living. But scientists believe that it can only work in case only one single cell, that is zygote, is affected. And the scientific lobby believes that more than one cell, that when zygote has already divided into 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32, some of the cells have affected, and this particular mutation will cause the early death of these two children. Only the time will tell.
Yeah.
But people are the scientific lobby is very, very cautious whether to have this atom bomb, which is working, coming from prokaryotic system and coming to eukaryotic system and working in such a nice, precise manner that we are grateful for the observation. We started right from 1665 by the observation of cell and ending up with this particular molecular system. So many diseases she talked, they were really very nice. They are really have a lot of control, but some of the diseases like what they are dealing is autism is very difficult to control because this happens on the 3rd or 4th year of the child's life. And it's very difficult to control anything which has already taken the first 3 weeks of the embryos. Such things will be able to get generated if we have the base. The base is in the hands of scientists, which we call it as the CRISPR technology. I remember the statement of one of the adage given by Darwin, who said, last line, who says that the honor of man, Madam Darwin, who once remarked that the honor of man lies in his learning. The honor of man lies in his learning. Wise people are the torches lighting the path of truth. In knowledge lies man's opportunity for immortality. While man may die, wisdom lives eternally. I think this statement needs to be changed, because now it should be the honor of man or woman lies in his or her learning. Wise people, this is okay, common. Wise people are the torches lighting the path of truth, and that may be a man or woman, because these two women working and reporting in 7 years, in 1 year, and putting it to application all around the world. I've got this year, 10th December, the first Nobel Prize, which goes to the woman team, goes to them. She has summarized everything, starting from cell and going up to the scissor. And I'm sure that she'll be able to deliver more things like that in future time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very well put, Professor Dua.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Professor Dua.
Most
This was a different kind of exposition in itself.
no.
No, wonderful.
Very nice.
Thank you so much.
So Mehak, we may have a few questions, although I don't see. Anuj, can you see any questions in the chat?
There is one question, ma'am, from Ayush Jain.
There is. I can also see in the chat box. So
There is one question from Ayush Jain.
okay.
He want to ask, what advances have been made in CRISPR 3.0 and 4.0 over the original CRISPR? How they made it more accurate with lesser off targets?
Okay, so Ayush, I do not know the exact answer to your question, but I think that the way it must have been done was you can design the Cas9 enzyme to work better. So, Cas9 is a natural, it's a naturally occurring enzyme, and we can always design or improve the activity of an enzyme, remove its non-specific activity by altering the amino acids of that particular protein. So I think the scientists who had wanted to make this enzyme better would have used the principles of protein designing, and so that it retains its enzymatic activity, but it now has lesser off-target effects. And such versions of Cas9 are available now in the market. So, one can commercially buy such versions of Cas9 which have a lesser off-target effect.
Dr. Mack, if you don't mind, I have a suggestion to you.
Sure.
But you should not be using the word molecule. 46 molecules, they are present in the cell. These are not the molecules. Because as you are laying the foundation, the students of 11th, 12th or first year or undergraduate, they will pick up that there are molecules in your cell and my cell. These are the physical entities which Virchow called it. Virchow, the Dutch scientist, called it as chromosomes. And in your total lecture, you must mention the name of Mendel, Austrian monk.
Yeah.
That these are the two suggestions of mine. Hope you do.
I'll take that up. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. फेसबुक पे क्वेश्चंस हैं क्या महिपाल जी, अनुज जी?
No, ma'am. Facebook पे तो नहीं है. There is one student, Sujata Malik. You are raising your hand and I cannot find the unmute option in your name. So please type your question in the chat box. Sujata Malik. Your audio is not connected. Please type your question in the chat box.
Is she there?
She is here, but her audio connection is not there, sir. So she's requested to please type the question in the chat box. Sujata Malik.
ने ऑडियो कनेक्ट नहीं किया होगा ना?
हाँ जी. Any other student want to ask something may raise their hand so that we can unmute you.
Professor Kant, Professor Ken.
कैन साहब हैं? कैन साहब, हाँ.
This is an excellent lecture which I have learned about cutting genome by some kind of scissors. I have been working all my life on metal cutting, very difficult to machine, and metal forming. This is really an excellent way, a rather excellent lecture which I have heard. Thanks, Madam Sharma ji. With God's grace, you would aspire still higher levels of learning, and I wish you good luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You really did well.
I hope to learn something about metal cutting. My knowledge is very good.
भाई मेटल कटिंग हर रोज ही कुछ ना कुछ घर में काटते रहते हैं, कभी सब्जी काटते हैं, कभी कुछ काटते हैं, मेटल काटते हैं. So, any more questions? But I have one question to ask, if you permit. How do you think this technology could be used for terrorists or terrorism purposes, or to spoil the entire civilization for that matter? Either the human race or the animal race.
So, so because of the information that we have on many aspects, many characteristics of, humans, let's say, we know that this particular gene has a role in diet, has a role in brain development. Probably someone who has the tools, they would like to experiment with improving or designing better humans, for instance. We know the gene for pain, for instance. We know that there are individuals in the world who feel less pain than others. So, and then the genetic basis of that, not feeling pain is also known. So someone may want to experiment with that, taking inspiration from fictional or superhero movies, X-Men like kind of things. So the CRISPR technique, because of the simplicity, it can be put, this 2-component system can be put in the human embryo at its inception stage, and it would do this. You can have a genetically edited genome. So if you know what you want to change, it is possible now with the technique, and the information is available. And also, so this is only about humans, but there are now in insects, for instance, in mosquitoes, people have done CRISPR so that to make them, let's say, sterile, so that we can remove the wild type mosquitoes which are in nature. So there are, many such ways which can actually harm the environment, which can harm our race, and it is possible with this technique.
So do you think the law is...
In reality, it is easier said than done. It's not a very efficient process. If you want to convert one base into another, it's an inefficient process, but it can happen with, if you do in 100 human embryos, you may get one which has the correct, sequence now. So
you think this technique is yet to evolve to its full status?
Yes, actually.
And if so, do you think a law is required so that
Absolutely.
it is not misused by the people?
Absolutely. Yeah, Jennifer Doudna and many other colleagues who have, have seen the potential of this has been advocating about this from day one, because they can see that it can happen, that this technique can be misused. And already the case that Professor Dua was mentioning, He Zhenki, the Chinese researcher. So, sequencing of the genome of those two twin girls has already shown that there are some off-target effects. This was also the question that was posed by this student, Ayush. The enzyme has some off-target activity. So we need to improve this technique so as you only edit where you know it should be edited and not any other sites. So we need to make this technique better, but we also need very stringent laws to prevent anybody from experimenting it, with, let's say, with human embryos, for instance. So much stricter laws are needed to regulate it. Absolutely.
But Dr. Mehak, you see, the only aberration they have found in these two Chinese girls is that in the long run, they will lose 5 to 6 years of their life. Their longevity will be lesser by 1%. That means 80 years to 8 years. If one lives for 72 years without any fear of AIDS in Africa, it's worth living and getting it.
Yeah, I agree with you. But the case here was that the gene that this was the mutation that was corrected by this scientist, it's a chemokine receptor called as CCR5.
Yeah.
So these two girls were not even at risk to begin with. The risk was also very small for them to actually get AIDS.
Yeah.
So the whole conception, he was trying to solve a problem which was not there to begin with. So that was a big concern here. And also sequencing of these two girls' genome has found that, already there has been off-target editing has been done because the enzyme is not very efficient. So that problem can now not be solved.
No,
and there were other ethical concerns also. The parents were not informed properly. They were not told in explicit terms that what exactly is going to happen. So couple of issues there with that experiment.
In March, the front news was that this CRISPR-Cas technology will be used as a COVID screen.
Yeah.
By May, this news disappeared somewhere. I don't know why. Where did we lose so far as the CRISPR-Cas COVID was concerned? In March, it appeared very, very, front news.
I'm trying to think. I'm not very sure. Maybe the reason was that we already have better strategies to, let's say, combat this virus in terms of vaccination. I'm not very sure an experimental strategy like CRISPR-Cas9, we even had the time in this pandemic to develop it as a therapeutic tool.
No, as a diagnostic tool.
As a diagnostic tool, actually, CRISPR-Cas9 has been developed in companies in US and now also in India. In India also, we have the Institute of IB has come out with a kit.
One is number 1 in Corona and second is number 2 in Corona. Unfortunately.
So it has not lived up to its promise. It has not happened as fast, but yeah.
Thank you. So Professor Suman Beri has a question there.
Yeah.
Suman Beri.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's not a question. I must compliment Mehak ji for a very nice presentation. As a physicist, I could understand and I listened each and every word and very nice presentation. Thank you very much. After a long time, we could understand what you are saying at least, and very good. Thank you. I must compliment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Suman, remember, physical forces worked, chemical reaction took place, biology evolved.
Right. Right.
Sometimes in these public lectures, one uses some liberty of words, but I'll keep it in mind that,
So that you made an attempt that a layman like us as a physicist also, we could at least understand, and it was interesting. So sitting throughout means that it was good.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mehak. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I will ask Mr. Dharamveer to propose a vote of thanks.
Right at the outset, I thank the speaker, Mehak Sharma, for such an excellent lecture. As Suman said, we could also understand, as a novice in biology, we could understand. I also like to thank Professor Grover for identifying Mahek, and but for him, we would not have had her lecture today. I also thank Professor Dua for summing up the lecture and making his comments, which were very useful. And I would like to just propose to Mahek that if she could be ready for taking this lecture to the general public, especially the school students as well as college students, because I think this is something which is very important that everyone should know about the genetics, genome editing, and in view of its potential for better uses and the bad uses as well. So finally, I thank everyone who has participated in this lecture, who has listened to this lecture, and Professor Grover as well as Professor Mahek Sharma. Thank you very much.
Thanks to SBSTI.
Thank you for this
Thank you.
opportunity.
Thank you, Mac.
May you live long.
Everybody join us tomorrow.
Grover sir, कहाँ है? Is he out?
Hello.
हाँ, ग्रोवर साहब आप हैं, आपका विशेष धन्यवाद।
No, मेरा धन्यवाद करने की जरूरत नहीं है।
नहीं, देखिए, आप तो जैसे कहते हैं ना कि एक सबसे बड़ा जो काम करता है मैसेंजर, वो मिलाने की बात करता है। तो आपने बहुत अच्छा ये स्पीकर को चूज किया है, इसके लिए मैं विशेष रूप से धन्यवाद करना चाहता हूँ।
We started in partnership with ISA, so it has gone well. More institutions are joining, so we have to get to a stage that this civic forum is used by whosoever wishes to reach out to the society.
Absolutely, this is meant
One
for
is the
that.
academic people who have to teach, who have to do all those things. They cannot take this agenda of reaching to the society. It will distract them from their main job. So NASI, your forum, other NGOs, professional organizations, they should work with active academics so that an outreach is provided to with the help of experts who are working at the frontiers of science. So,
it is very important. It's extremely
Absolutely.
important for people to know what is happening.
Yeah.
and you cannot expect, I have been an active scientist for 30, 40 years. It is difficult to take out time out for doing these things. So you need some others who will enable the active scientists to see that their expertise gets known to the society for the education of the society, for the young people in the society. And one great byproduct of this pandemic is that via this online mode, more things are happening, and with the easy availability and cheap availability of the technology, everything is lying in some form which people can access later.
Absolutely.
This was not like this few years ago.
Yeah.
Whatever revolution that internet brought into the lives of the scientists, the same revolution has been brought in by pandemic, that the software companies have made these things available very cheaply. This Cisco has been having these platforms for a long time. Infosys has all these platforms for a long time to connect to their company people internally. Whatever they were doing to promote their businesses, okay, it has come out of those company domains, and now it has become an everyday thing, which the grandchildren of ours are using it more efficiently than our children.
Yes.
I can see it. My nephew's children are using the online mode more accurately than their mother. Her daughter-in-law is less savvy than granddaughter.
The online forum
आपकी बात बिल्कुल सही है. Knowledge without borders हो जाएगा exactly.
Yeah.
So that is why, your forum has to be sustained.
Yes.
Society must own SPSTI. It is not named after somebody. You
So,
rightly, when you created
Mehak,
that
you must join us because you are young and you can. We are old people now, so you people like you can take it forward for a much longer
you
period.
very thoughtfully named it as Society for Promotion of Science and Technology in India. It is not specific to Chandigarh. It is not specific to
Yes, that's
Haryana,
right.
and it is not named after. You would have also named Homi Bhabha Science Society. No, we have not named it after. It's like, Jamshed Tata saying that a research institute should be created. It should be named Indian Institute of Science. The word Tata should not appear anywhere at all.
The Grover Sahib, when we were forming, we had long discussion on the name, and we all felt that it should be neutral and we should have at least two words. One is science and technology, one, and India, second. So we did it purposely.
It's a great
Otherwise,
name.
a lot of people suggested we could name it after Raman or some other person.
It was very
scientist,
rightly,
but we
aptly done it well. And
Very
you can
nice.
see it. It doesn't even have the name of a city or a region.
no, it doesn't have a name of city.
India.
In fact, I often felt that the society, Science and Technology in India, is a little boastful, but now it is, almost coming true. We have
See, we
some
have
kind of all India
IISers,
reach.
we have so many national labs, we have IITs, we have NITs, we have so many newer institutions which are coming and getting embedded in this region.
Grover Sahib, as of today, there are about 1,000 national labs of different departments of the government of India, and about 1,000 universities in our country. So we have such a fantastic uh, infrastructure, and 1,000 labs are spread all over the country. There is not a single state where there is no national laboratory. Every state has one or more national laboratories. Likewise, in fact, I dream that every second district of the country would have a university now.
I don't know how much influence you have, but if you can host a meeting, okay, maybe an online meeting with the resident editors of all the newspapers, English, Punjabi, Hindi, Urdu, whatever in our region, okay, and make them aware as to this public platform. So that
We'll do it. It's a good
the
suggestion.
activities which are being done under this platform, they should carry it forward as a positive news for the society, because what you are doing is actually for the society, and the newspapers also exist prima facie for dissemination of things of importance to the society. So maybe, you should connect up to the resident editors of newspapers and this thing. Maybe prepare a short booklet for their information, awareness for them, that they should encourage their correspondents to cover things that happen on behalf of this forum for this thing. This way, slowly the message will spread.
Professor Dharamveer, I wanted to say that there is a young academy of INSA, which is called as INIAS.
INIAS.
Their motto is also to reach out to public and to make science communicable to public. And many INIAS members, I'm one of them. They are in Chandigarh in this region.
Yeah.
We also have an INIAS local chapter, like INSA local chapter.
Yeah.
So many INIAS colleagues who, they're experts in their areas would be very willing to connect.
So maybe, Dharamveer, we should explore that just as we think it's an outreach of Nasi Chandigarh chapter. Let's advertise our forum also. It's an outreach of INIAS Chandigarh chapter.
All right. No, it's a good suggestion, and we'll work on it now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And maybe that we use your resources back.
I'll connect you to them.
I'll be grateful.
Yeah, Rohit Sharma is there from Punjab University when he
Sugandha
was
Maheshwari is there.
Sugandha, they're all in INIAS.
CSIO से अभी इन्होंने women scientist पे किया था. I attended.
So INIAS is, instead of their exploring the partnership, as a president of the SPSTI, you should write to them, okay, an exploring partnership with them. And Standard Pasi approached us, okay, so we do the reverse, okay.
Yeah, the way that I see it, INIAS has a lot of these scientists who are very willing to give public lectures and connect with students and general public. And you probably have the resources to connect them, to enable them, as Professor Grover said. So it would be a wonderful partnership.
Because you know, people who are teaching this, that the priorities are different. You have to teach, you have to also publish to remain relevant and compete with your peer group. So every load cannot be taken by serving teachers.
No, no, you're very correct, and I think we need to reach out to other people, as both of you said, Mac and you said. The second thing that we would like to do is, you see, Chandigarh has several institutions, and we need to get connected with them too. I tried to work out with a few of them, and hopefully next 1 or 2 months we'll be able to have lectures from some of the scientists working in these.
Mahek, can you just help us to get the email IDs of all the INEAS people in Chandigarh region? Okay.
I'll do that. No,
if you get that, then we will have them as a part of our mailing list to start with.
No, standard mailing list जो है हमारी उसमें हो जाएगा.
सारे के सारे कर दें, and then we also start saying that it is in partnership with INEAS Chandigarh chapter.
हाँ ठीक है, बिल्कुल.
Absolutely, I'll do that. That's no trouble at all. I'll do that right away.
Imagine today, till the end, there are 122, 117 at this time the participants, which is maximum in any of our lectures.
क्या कह रहे हैं आप?
दुआ साहब कह रहे हैं 122. दुआ साहब जब लेक्चर चल रहा था तब 35 थे.
हाँ जी.
इनके 12 बजे इनकी कहीं पे क्लास खत्म हुई होगी.
मैंने कहा ना, at the end we still at this time
12 बजे हरियाणा में कहीं पे क्लासेस, अंबाला गवर्नमेंट कॉलेज अंबाला, वहां पे कोई क्लास चल रही थी, वो 12 बजे खत्म हुई है, सबने ज्वाइन किया.
And if they have carried, you know, a segment,
but yeah, they can all access the lecture offline.
हाँ, no, I'm saying even that is commendable कि उनको पता था कि 12 बजे खत्म हो जाएगी, फिर भी they are curious enough to join and see what's happening.
अंबाला से पिछले इवेंट में भी
a larger license also is, you know, validated.
हाँ, large 500 का लाइसेंस लिया हुआ है हमने.
अब 500 का लिया हुआ है.
500 का लिया.
नहीं, ये बहुत अच्छा प्लेटफॉर्म है, and it is very cheap and it is expansive in a way. You can expand anywhere to any extent. चलिए, कुछ तो लॉकडाउन से फायदा हुआ है हमें भी नई टेक्नोलॉजीज को अडॉप्ट करने में थोड़ी सी. Final word by Professor Dua.
No, sir. I was saying that I bought a lecture last week by Nobel laureate Balaji, medical Nobel laureate, which was delivered last week in Cambridge University. It is by Nice, Professor Nice. And that I bought it. So now I've got the recording. It's a 40 minutes lecture. In case you want to play it on your system.
Please, you tell us when you want to do it.
I have just now, after 5 minutes, I can send you. You have to add my code.
नहीं, हम लोग ऐसा करेंगे कि इसको अनाउंस कर देंगे and you do the moderation and question answer session.
That's I bought it for 25. I paid the entry ticket of 25 pounds, and so I got the recording of that one that can be played now by code words.
ठीक है. So we'll fix.
Very nice. We will fix it.
Very nice. Yes.
We'll fix time, and this gives us an idea whether we can have the lectures of the Nobel laureates in physics, chemistry, and other areas, literature.
The title of that lecture is "Looking for Life in Self."
अच्छा, बहुत बढ़िया. अच्छा, now क्या?
So we close now, and tomorrow 11 o'clock we have a memorial meeting in honor of Dr. F.C. Kohli. Who was the very big technology giant from this region. So we will do the meeting tomorrow.
कंपानी का भी कर रहे हैं इसी में?
कंपानी का इसमें नहीं करना.
अच्छा.
कंपानी का बाद में करेंगे. We may mention कंपानी there, but tomorrow is some people from industry and some people from academics coming together to honor Dr. F.C. Kohli. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well done. 3 cheers for SPST.
Yeah, 3 cheers for SPST.
करें सर.
End कर दीजिए महिपाल जी.
जी मैम. Thank you मैम. Thank you.